today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "Men are no longer burning women at the stake. They're now killing them by big government." There's a couple of important things that I learned when I was doing the research for this article yesterday that I want to share with you that I think are really worth knowing about. The article starts out with the story of a woman in Oklahoma who had a what's called a molar pregnancy. They are never successful, and they very often kill the woman carrying them. And this fetus was dying inside her, and she went to a Catholic hospital first because it was near her. But that is one in 6 hospital beds in America are run, as money-making operations for the Catholic Church. I realize they call it nonprofit, but you know where that money's going. And they refused to help her because they're Catholic. So then she went to the University of Oklahoma Medical Center, but that too was a dead end, no pun intended. They said, "We can't touch you because of Oklahoma law." To save her life, her husband drove her to Kansas, where there was an abortion clinic that was still open, and she had to walk through a jeering crowd carrying signs that said, "Stone all the whores." Seriously. These were the signs at the abortion clinic in Kansas. Now, if it seems to you like women in red states are the subjects of witch hunts, you are right. And when I did a deep dive yesterday afternoon into the history of witch hunts, I was just amazed by what I learned. First off, the Republican Party has turned this into a political thing. I mean, in 1980, prior to 1980, the Republicans and the Democrats were both just fine with Roe v. Wade. Pre-viability abortion is up to the woman, and post-viability abortion is, an issue that the state can intervene in, and appropriately so. I think there's a broad consensus across American society about that. Ronald Reagan had signed the nation's most permissive abortion regulations in 1967 when he was governor of California. And George Herbert Walker Bush, his running mate, was a big supporter of Planned Parenthood, as was his wife, all the way back into the 60s when he was a congressman from Texas. But leading up to that election, they cut a deal with Jerry Falwell and decided to go all anti-abortion, thinking that would help them out. So in doing so, they were really following a long tradition of men seizing political power on the backs, metaphorically, but sometimes literally, of women. The first witch hunts, there were not any consequential witch hunts before the 1500s, which in and of itself is fascinating. So what caused them to happen in the 1500s? What was it that caused the Catholic Church and then many Protestant churches to start going after and burning women at the stake, hanging them, drowning them, killing them, imprisoning them? Why? Well, a couple of researchers did a deep dive into this, Peter Leeson and Jacob Russ. It was published in the Journal of the Royal Economic Society about 10 years ago. And I'll just share 2 paragraphs of this study with you. Europe's witch hunt trials reflected non-price competition between the Catholic and Protestant churches for religious market share in confessionally contested parts of Christendom. By leveraging popular belief in witchcraft, witch prosecutors advertised their confessional brand's commitment and power to protect citizens from worldly manifestations of Satan's evil. Similar to how, these researchers wrote this, similar to how contemporary Republican and Democratic candidates focus campaign activity in political battlegrounds during elections to attract the loyalty of undecided voters, historical Catholic and Protestant officials focused witch trial activity in confessional battleground areas during the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation to attract the loyalty of undecided Christians. In other words, it was political. The witch hunts were designed to get people to sign up to be either Catholic or Protestant, whoever they thought would more accurately or more competently protect them from the evils of the witches. Also, the other thing that I noted, that I learned, was that throughout the late 1500s and into the 1600s, through the 17th century, in Europe and here in the United States, principally in New England, most of the victims of witch hunts were women who performed abortions or provided herbs for abortions, or in some cases were simply midwives. But they were, essentially, and why was this? Why did the witch hunters go after women who did abortions? Well, it turns out that in feudal England, in feudal Europe, actually, children were a cheap source of labor for the feudal lords. The feudal lords literally owned the serfs. They owned, if you were a serf family in Europe in the 1600s, you were the property of the local lord, as were your children. So anybody who was reducing the supply of child labor through abortion was to be, executed. And, there's also multiple studies from that era that show that whenever there was a time of economic insecurity in Europe, there was an explosion of witch hunts. Again, tying, producing children back to economic benefits to the family. So how does this apply to the United States? Well, in 1973, when abortion was legalized by the Supreme Court in the Roe v. Wade decision, the majority of workers in America were solidly middle class. Fully 65% of Americans were in the American middle class. 65% of Americans could buy a house, could buy a car, could take a vacation every year, could set aside money for retirement, and could do all this with the wages of one single breadwinner. That was the case in 1973 when Roe v. Wade was passed. And Roe v. Wade was not controversial. The whole backlash to Roe v. Wade really didn't start popping up until the late 70s, early 80s. Well, what happened in the early 80s? Ronald Reagan declared war on that middle class. He broke up unions. He criminalized unions. He froze the minimum wage. He raised taxes on working class people 18 times. He cut taxes on the morbidly rich 7 times. It was a complete reversal. And what we saw over the following years was a $50 trillion transfer of wealth out of the homes and checking and savings accounts of working class people into the money bins of the top 1%, the morbidly rich. Now, what does that do? It produces economic insecurity. And once again, what we see when you look at the 1500s, the 1600s, the early 1700s in Europe in particular, but also in New England, during times of economic insecurity, witch hunts exploded. So here we are. And not only that, this is, this was all about economic competition. If white men who were fat and happy in 73, but no longer, now, if white men could knock out half of the population, the women, and another 15% of the population, African Americans, if they could knock them out of the workforce, by and large, effectively, or at least a large chunk of them, the mean pie, as a consequence of Reaganomics, they would have a larger slice of that shrinking pie. How do we know this? Well, and that there were 5 states that had legalized abortion prior to Roe, prior to 1973. California, Alaska, Hawaii, New York, and Washington State. It was also legal in Washington, D.C. And so these researchers went back and they looked at the statistics of those 5 states versus all the rest of the United States before Roe v. Wade. And what they found was that abortion legalization, we're in the break, Sean, abortion legalization reduced the number of women who became teen mothers by 34% and the number who became teen brides by 20%. Legalization reduced maternal mortality among black women by 30 to 40%. Now today, this is leading to suicides, and I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's actually a measurable increase in suicides among young women as a consequence of trap laws. I'll tell you all about that. Stay tuned.
is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of déjà vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired two former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montana.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Monday, happy Mayday. It's International Workers' Day in commemoration of the Haymarket Massacre, among other things. And the people in France are out in the streets protesting Macron's decision to reduce the retirement age in France from 60, or to increase it, from 62 to 64. So we got a lot to talk about today. For the next time some idiot tries to tell you the Republicans are the party of business, I've got some details for you, shall we say. Also, peaceful protests are being outlawed and prison sentences imposed by Republicans in a move not good for democracy. We will get to that in a moment. Christian nationalism and pastors for Trump. This is why we need separation of church and state. In the, the second hour of the program, how Clarence Thomas helped kill an eviction ban threatening his benefactor's business. Also revealed a Senate investigation into Brett Kavanaugh's assault claims was apparently phony baloney. And down in Florida, the Florida Republicans send an egregious voter suppression bill to DeSantis for his signature. In the third hour, our single guest for the day, Alex Lawson, the executive director of Social Security Works, is going to drop by. 217 Republicans just voted to cut Social Security. There is a war on Social Security coming out of the GOP. Alex will give us the details in the third hour of the program today at 11 o'clock Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern. Greg Abbott and right-wing media are attempting to turn a gun issue into an illegal immigrant issue. Will this desperate effort work? And also in the third hour, wildfires in Anchorage. Climate change is whacking Alaska's largest town, and that's not good. So a lot to talk about today. I want to start out with my rant from HartmanReport.com, my daily take. It's titled, "For the next time some idiot tries to tell you the GOP is the party of business." I believe it was on CNN. It was fairly early in the morning. It was one of the news talk shows, and I was channel surfing, and I just heard some Republicans say, well, the Republican Party is better with business. They are the party of business. Words to that effect, right? And, I hear this every weekend. It's like if you watch the Sunday shows, the politics shows, almost every weekend you're going to hear some Republicans say, yeah, we're the party of business. We know what's going on. Well, no, the Republicans are not the party of small business or of business in general. I mean, maybe they were when Dwight Eisenhower was president, when I was a little kid in the 1950s. But it has not been that way since the Reagan Revolution at all. I mean, first of all, the core of American business before Reagan was small and medium-sized companies. Yeah, there were some large companies, but, they mostly just did like national production stuff, General Motors making cars. We enforced the antitrust laws so aggressively, and this was all to protect small, local, and medium-sized local and family-owned businesses. We protected those businesses so aggressively with the antitrust laws that in the 1960s, when Kinney and Buster Brown Shoes wanted to merge, a combined company that would control a little more than 5%, a little less, than 5% of the total shoe market, the Supreme Court shot it down. That was the policy of America. But, now you've got 20% of the shoe market controlled by just one company, Nike, for example. Small and medium-sized companies built America, but in 1983, when Reagan ordered the DOJ, the FTC, and the SEC to stop enforcing the antitrust laws, dating back to 1891, like the Sherman Act, these giant corporations began a relentless campaign to destroy locally owned businesses. Also, education supports business. You know, in the 1950s, Dwight Eisenhower was building schools, tens of thousands of them, all across America. You know, from the earliest days of the Industrial Revolution, we were always very proud of the fact that America had one of the best educated workforces in the world. But in 2010, when a group of fossil fuel billionaires bankrolled the Tea Party and were looking for an issue to beat up Democrats with, they settled on Common Core. Common Core was a set of national standards for graduating from high school, basically, that were fairly high. But the Tea Party, well, actually, it started with Fox News and right-wing hate radio. They started to say, oh, Common Core is indoctrination. It's the new communist indoctrination of our children. And it ran day after day after day on Fox News, just like the whole critical race theory thing. That's the 2020 version. This was the 2010 version 10 years ago, that state after state, Republican-controlled state after state, did away with Common Core. And now they're trying to do away with their public schools altogether. Arizona was the first state to offer vouchers to attend religious schools or all-white, so-called private academies to any student in the state. Now Texas, Florida, Kansas, and a dozen other Republican-run states are planning on doing the same. Unions made America and made American business rich. You know, Dwight Eisenhower ran for re-election on supporting unions. Reagan went after them with PATCO. Dwight Eisenhower created the Small Business Administration, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency. These were Republicans before Reagan. Post-Reagan, they hate all these agencies. I mean, back in 2004, this is another thing. Republicans keep business costs absurdly high. Back in 2004, Toyota announced they'd be opening a new facility in North America. 3 southern U.S. states offered them billions in tax advantages. But they ended up going to Canada. Why? Because the costs of healthcare are half in Canada what they are here, and healthcare is one of the major parts of the expenses of having employees. But here's the real kicker, the punchline. In fact, I probably should have put this at the beginning of the article instead of toward the end. Between 1933 and 2020, there were 14 American presidents, 7 Democratic and 7 Republican. Under those 7 Republican presidents, the economy grew at only 2.4%. Under those 7 Democratic presidents, the economy grew at 4.6%. 10 of the past 11 recessions began under Republican presidents. And although it looks like lifelong Republican Jerome Powell is trying to impose one on President Biden. Republicans have exploded the national debt. The only balanced budgets in the last 60 years came out of the Carter, Clinton, and Obama administrations. Bill Clinton left George W. Bush a $128 billion surplus after 4 consecutive years of budget surpluses. Bush immediately squandered it with a massive tax cut for billionaires and 2 illegal wars. President Biden just last year decreased federal spending by $550 billion and reduced the deficit by $1.4 trillion, the largest one-year deficit drop in American history, all while creating 5 times more jobs in 2 years than the last 3 Republican presidents combined. If not for the Reagan, Bush, and Trump tax cuts for billionaires and 2 wars George W. Bush lied us into, our national debt today would be 0 instead of over $30 trillion. Yet these guys have the gall to demand that Biden cut veterans programs, food stamps, public schools, student loan debt relief, the IRS, the EPA, green energy programs, funding for rail inspections, and make Trump's tax cuts for himself and his billionaire buddies permanent in exchange for not intentionally crashing the economy. The simple reality is that Republicans have nothing more than hate and fear to sell. This is it. They've got no plan for the economy. They haven't had a plan for the economy since the election of Ronald Reagan that goes beyond deregulation for giant polluting corporations and tax cuts for billionaires. That's it. That's all they've got. And these policies, are terrible for America, So they're replacing them now, or they're trying to downplay them by shifting our emphasis, saying, hey, look over here, while our left hand is giving billionaire tax cuts and letting coal companies dump more pollution into rivers to pollute downstream water supplies. With our right hand, we're doing something we think you'll like, at least you, base Republican primary voters, trashing public schools, removing hundreds of books from schools and libraries, saturating our towns and cities with weapons of war, banning women's access to reproductive health care, packing our courts with judges who'd be comfortable with the American Nazi movement, the Federalist Society, and the John Birch Society. So the next time some idiot tries to tell you that the Republican Party is the party of business, let them know the real facts. The only businesses that Republicans actually support are gun sellers, mega churches, corrupt defense contractors, and giant monopolies. And none of those are good for average Americans or locally owned businesses or even the entire U.S. economy. The GOP is not the party of business. The Democratic Party is the party of business. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Peaceful protests being outlawed, people thrown in jail, seriously, and Christian nationalism and pastors for Trump. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, happy Monday. What's up?
Hey, happy Monday to you too, Tom. Listen, I had a question for you. $700,000 of Neil Gorsuch's debts have disappeared, and I was just wondering if you had participated in any of that.
Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh?
Oh, no, Neil, I think that was Gorsuch. Brett Kavanaugh was guilty of rape that the FBI didn't want to investigate.
But Kavanaugh also had, a huge debt. He had huge credit card debt, and he owed a lot of money on the mortgage on his really wealthy house, and that all got paid off. I didn't know that Gorsuch had gotten that. You should double check that, Morris. I mean, you might be right.
Well,
I just don't know.
I'll tell you my source. My source is Joy Reid on MSNBC.
Oh, okay.
We'll come back to that.
Well, hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I guess both of them got their debts paid off by rich buddies. Maybe it was Harlan Crow. Who knows? I mean, he sure is helping out Clarence Thomas.
I got another one for you. How long has John Roberts been the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court?
Since the Bush administration. Bush put him in there after Rehnquist died. I think that was like 2003, thereabouts.
Okay, I got same source. I understand that his old lady, his wife, Mrs. Roberts, has been making $10 million a year referring attorneys to here and there and everywhere. Did you know that the Supreme Court Justice wife was making $10 million a year, exploiting her position as the Supreme Court Justice wife?
Yeah, she's made over $10 million in commissions. It's not per year. That's the aggregate amount that they're estimating she has made since he became Chief Justice. But that's not chump change, I mean, and yeah, that's what she does for a living. Is she's a headhunter for lawyers and law clerks and things like that. And she's apparently very, very well paid for this work.
Tom, you're a smart man. How come the FBI has not stepped into this? How come the DOJ has not stepped into this? I mean, this is unbelievable corruption. You're talking about an institution that operates with no ethics, and then we're talking about we're going to wait until the Supreme Court tells us how they're going to have oversight for their own people. Tom, you got to come up with an idea, and you got to get it to the right people to get some kind of oversight for our Supreme Court, man, because, these 9 people, at least 6 of them, and they got more power than some countries. It's crazy. Yeah. So some kind of oversight has got to be done. This is embarrassing. You think Trump is embarrassing. Look what's going on with our courts, Tom. These people are supposed to be like umpires. They don't care who wins the game, calling balls and strikes. But that's not really the case right now. Yeah. And I don't know if we can go back and change some of the decisions or rulings. I doubt if we could ever do something like that. But we're going to have to do something to bring some kind of ethical oversight to the Supreme Court, Tom, because we can't make it like this. And I'm sorry for assuming that you helped participate in paying off that $700,000.
Morris, I have authored op-eds and done rants about exactly this on this program a number of times. The one, and the typical answer from the media is, well, there's no rules right now for the Supreme Court because they get to make their own rules and they chose not to make any. That's not actually true. There is a federal law that has to do with judicial ethics, and it includes the members of the Supreme Court. And it's fairly clear that at the very least, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Roberts, and perhaps Kavanaugh, have violated that law. And Amy Coney Barrett, I don't know if you knew, Morris, her husband has a law firm that is now, has just exploded since she got put on the bench, and because of his connections to the Supreme Court. And she doesn't talk about that. And her father was one of the chief lawyers for, I believe it was Shell Oil Company, and she doesn't recuse herself from climate change cases either. Morris, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have been pushing legislation and ideas that would basically crash the economy. And a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads going, why would Republicans who basically are owned by billionaires and big corporations, why would they want to crash the economy? Doesn't that hurt billionaires and big corporations? In fact, no, it doesn't. Billionaires and big corporations actually get richer and more profitable during economic crashes. The largest fortunes in America were made during the Great Depression, or some of them. Joe Kennedy, J. Paul Getty, they made a fortune because it was everything was cheap because everything had crashed, so they were buying up stock and buying houses. They had cash. Also, they have more negotiating power with unions, with workers, with their vendors. There's all kinds of benefits to billionaires and big corporations of having a crash. So don't think the Republicans won't do it. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So a rather incredible story out of Arkansas. Down in Arkansas, the Arkansas legislature recently voted to force trans students to use restrooms that match their birth gender. And they also banned several books that include trans characters. So it's war on trans people in Arkansas. So Alex Barnett, who's a junior at the University of Central Arkansas, said, oh, and by the way, when the ban was being discussed, the Arkansas legislature heard testimony from a fellow by the name of Cal Powelson, who said, and I quote, speaking of trans people, God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they do what they should not be doing. They invent ways of doing evil. But let me remind you that those who do such things deserve death. So here's a guy calling for murdering trans people before the state legislature, an official under oath testimony. I'm not sure if it was under oath, but anyhow, in official testimony. Not a single legislator on the Republican side objected to that comment. Not one. And later, they unanimously approved the bathroom restrictions and the book bans. So Barnett, Alex Barnett, this junior at the University of Central Arkansas, he says he organizes a protest. He says, ultimately, when I'm fighting for trans rights, I'm also fighting for my own rights. If you don't show up for people who are marginalized, the people who are facing the most severe oppression from government, if you don't show up to help them, then you're screwed when they come for you. Yeah. So this is the Conway School Board, right? And it's been taken over by Republicans. And so he and about 20 students from the University of Central Arkansas decided to show up and protest these anti-trans policies. Excuse me, I said that it was the legislature in the beginning. It wasn't. It was the school board. My apologies. So they showed up at the school board meeting and were told, sorry, no seats in the room. So they said, well, we'll stand by the back wall. And they said, no, you can't do that. So they went outside and sat in the hallway, outside the meeting room. About 30 minutes into the meeting, he and his group started chanting, Trans Lives Matter. The police officer asked them to leave. Everybody left but Barnett and two other people. Those three were handcuffed and stuck in three separate rooms. Their actions had interrupted the meeting for a total of 8 minutes, by the way. Barnett has no criminal record. He has not even a traffic violation. And he was offered a plea deal. Hey, just plead guilty and apologize to the school board and we'll let you off. And he said, no, I'm going to defend myself. So he goes to court and says, I didn't do anything wrong. Yes, I was there. Yes, I protested, but that's protected by the First Amendment. I didn't do anything wrong. And the two police officers who were there testified that he intimidated the school board members and the people at the meeting. Intimidated them. They weren't even in the same room with them. Intimidated them. So District Judge Chris Carnahan finds Barnett guilty and sentenced him to 10 days in jail and a $650 fine. Now, who is this judge who just threw this University of Arkansas student in jail? By the way, when he showed up in jail, his cellmate advised him that once he was transferred to the holding cell to the general population, he would be surrounded by white supremacists, and he shouldn't tell them that he was there to defend trans people or they would beat him up badly, or worse. So anyhow, who's the judge who put this college student in jail? Well, Carnahan is the former executive director of the Arkansas Republican Party. He used the slogan, finally a conservative judge, when running for office. He collected tens of thousands of dollars from Republican Party committees, even though the races are nonpartisan and such contributions violate the Arkansas Judicial Code of Conduct. This judge posted, Let's Go Brandon, and a tribute to Rush Limbaugh on his Facebook page. On his campaign website, he says, I'm a member of Gun Owners of America and the National Rifle Association and a follower of Christ. He likes on Facebook the Family Council Action Committee, which is a hate group, and the Arkansas affiliate of Focus on the Family, another hate group, anti-LGBTQ hate group. So there's going to be an appeal. We'll see how it plays out. But hey, standing up for what you believe in Arkansas apparently gets you thrown in jail, because the judge is such a good Christian after all. Meanwhile, what happened in Tennessee and then happened in Montana has now spread to Oklahoma. I'll tell you about that after the break and pick up your calls. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm Thom Hartmann. I'll be right back.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast Southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25th, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. And welcome back. So the infographic of the day over at the top of Democratic Underground is titled, "Please take a moment today to spare a thought for poor, underprivileged Sam Alito." Yes, he may be one of the most powerful people in the United States, appointed for life to a position which gives him the ability to ram his extreme right-wing beliefs down the throats of every single American citizen. A position giving him immense control over the lives of all Americans while remaining free from accountability or ethical considerations. But it's not all sunshine and roses for Sam Alito. You see, sometimes people criticize him, and that makes him very, very sad. This is what he told the Wall Street Journal last week, and I quote, "We are being hammered daily, and I think quite unfairly in a lot of instances, and practically nobody is defending us." So please take a moment today to spare a thought for Sam Alito. He's just a lowly Supreme Court justice living in the lap of luxury, and all he wants is to take away your rights and not have to listen to you whine about it, okay? Brilliant. Okay, so first it was the Tennessee 3 that, got thrown out of the Tennessee legislature. Then it was the legislator in Montana who got shut down and censured and purged, essentially. Now it's in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's only non-binary, the one in Montana was a trans legislator, in fact. Now in Oklahoma's only non-binary state lawmaker, who, by the way, is also Muslim. Their name is Representative Maureen Turner, Democrat from Oklahoma City, was censured by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives on Tuesday and stripped of all their committee assignments. It comes after Representative Turner was accused of allowing a trans Oklahoman to hide in their office. It was a party line vote, 81-19. Every single Republican voted to kick Turner out, and the Democrats immediately responded by holding a press conference. Representative Turner, who is black and Muslim, told media outlets that they were given an ultimatum: apologize to law enforcement or be censured. Representative Turner said, quote, "I think an apology for loving the people of Oklahoma is something that I cannot do. I will never apologize for showing up fully and freely as myself. I will never apologize for allowing the people of Oklahoma to show up fully and freely as themselves, because that is the work that they elected me to do." And, what had happened was Turner, they had provided, this is a quote, "I just provided my office as a space of grace and love for all the folks in all communities that seek refuge from the hate in this building. Trans people don't feel safe here. I receive death threats. I am a target daily in this building, and now I am silenced." Even so-called moderate Republicans, the story in the Black Wall Street Times talks about, even so-called moderate Republicans such as Dan Pay, the Republican from Lawton, and State Senator John Montgomery have voted with their far-right colleagues to criminalize transgender and non-heteronormative identities. A poll in January found 85% of transgender and non-binary youth say recent debates around anti-trans bills have negatively impacted their mental health. It found 45% of trans youth experienced cyberbullying as a result of these policies and debates, with 1 in 3 reporting feeling unsafe going to the doctor or hospital when they're sick. It's incredible. Fox 25's Wendy Suarez, a reporter at the local television station, said, quote, "During all this reaction to the censuring of Democratic Representative Maureen Turner today, there are 2 sitting members in leadership positions," that would be Republican leadership positions in the Oklahoma House, with active felony charges against them. Representatives Ryan Martinez and Representative Terry O'Donnell. In December, Martinez was charged with a felony for driving while intoxicated. Representative Terry recently resigned as House Speaker pro tem and turned himself into police after he was indicted for misusing his power to change state laws so his wife could become a tag agent. I'm not sure what a tag agent is. Maybe license plate tags, hunting license. I don't know. But whatever it was skeezy. So anyhow, let's pick up your calls. What's on your mind today? Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, you recall when Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans were putting their budget out to hold America hostage, it didn't get passed right off. There were some people that he had to change some minds. Well, it just turns out that 4 of those happened to be Iowa Republicans from the 4 Republican districts in Iowa. We all went all Republican, and it was over the ethanol and biofuels. The Republicans were going to cut any funding for development, research, any of that out of that budget. Well,
for green
what?
energy, right.
For green energy and stuff. Well, guess what? Our Republicans, Randy Feenstra, Miller Meeks, Ashley Hinson, and Zach Dunn, none of them evidently knew what was in the Republican budget plan.
Right.
And I think that budget plan was probably basically written out by Americans for Prosperity and the Heritage Foundation, I'm sure. Well, they were the holdouts. So guess what happened? Kevin McCarthy had to cancel that out and take that defunding out of his bill so that they could all sign in and pass it. Well, now they're running around Iowa bragging how they saved the farmers of Iowa and everything from this disastrous budget. It was their budget.
Right. These are Republicans bragging that they saved Iowa from other Republicans? How does that fly in Iowa?
I think so. That's it. They're bragging. They must think the farmers and the people of Iowa are just completely stupid, evidently.
Well, I think Republicans do think that. They know that if they run enough ads filled with lies, and if they have enough radio stations in the state that are filled with people spreading hate and misinformation and lies, then they will get a certain percentage of the population to believe them and go along with it all.
Well, yeah, and that's what they're doing. They're just bragging to pieces how they saved the farmers and the ethanol industry from this disastrous budget. They just forget to tell anybody it was their budget.
Is your media there in Iowa or in Fort Dodge or anywhere else statewide? Is any of the media pointing out the hypocrisy of this?
No, and they just kind of bumble along when the local channels, which are out of Des Moines, that we get are called ABC, NBC, and CBS. Right. They just kind of follow along, and nobody's really come out and said, guys, the very thing that you're supposedly saving from, you're the guys that put it out. Right. And it's sad, and I don't know what you think. The Iowa Democratic Party would just be all over this.
Yeah, I would think so. Jeff, and then let's hope so. Jeff, thanks for the heads up on that. I appreciate the report from Iowa today. Thank you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, on this question of what is the nature of the Republican Party, current iteration of the Republican Party, right. I've actually thought a lot about that this weekend. And look, there was, I don't know if you saw Amir Ohana. He's the Speaker of the Knesset. He serenaded McCarthy with Hotel California. I'm like, how ironic is that? Okay,
wait a minute. The Speaker of the Israeli Knesset sang a song to McCarthy. Was McCarthy in Israel?
Yes, and it was Hotel California. You know what Hotel California is about, right, Tom? They're in hell. They don't. But Hotel California is about a bunch of rich, affluent people that end up in a hotel where they're served all the time, blah, blah, blah. But they are dead, and they don't even know it, and they're in hell. I mean, check it out.
I didn't know that. I remember the song, but I never really carefully listened to the lyrics.
Well, that's okay. I just thought it was ironic. And also, over the weekend, I heard a lady, I think she was from Sudan. I think she was Sudanese. She was a reporter, and she was trying to explain why Russia is actually causing this conflict in Sudan. Man, my heart went out to her. Then there was another one. I think she was South African. She had a South African accent. She was trying to explain why Russia is also involved in the killings. She's calling them a killing field in Myanmar. Okay, also very difficult. But check this out. This is all about conformity, all right? And what Republicans are trying to do is say, look, if you do not conform to our interpretation of Western civilization and the Christian Bible, you are contagious, and you do not have a role in democracy. Yep. Well, the problem with this is if we do war around the world, all right, and we are in the name of democracy, which will inevitably happen, while restricting democracy at home, it is not going to work.
Yep.
And frankly, I believe that Iran, I'm almost 90% sure, Tom, and I'm never 90% sure on anything. I think Iran is cooking up a October surprise to help Trump and the Republicans, and it's going to be a nuclear test. Now, normally Iran is also the regime in Tehran is completely fictitious, okay? They are also a fraud, but they have a pretense. They uphold this pretense of strict adherence to Islam. They're going to break that. They're going to do a nuclear test. And
Russia's talking about doing a nuclear test now, too.
Well, Russia will probably help them because it's the smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
And then blame it on Joe Biden. Yeah. Israel and the Republicans over here will blame it on a policy of weakness and democracy run amok.
Yep, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Dave. Dave, thank you. Thanks for the call, the heads up on all that. Fascinating. And a great analysis. It's 45 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls here on the Thom Hartmann program. Talk media for the sane among us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Keno in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Keno, what's on your mind today?
Well, happy Mayday to us and the whole world, and may workers across the world get fair deals.
There you go.
I haven't heard you mention about Mayday today, Tom.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Republican Party took a wrong turn. And I think for the next election, there needs to be maybe one book already exists. If it does not, it needs to be created, which is a summary of where the Republican Party went down the wrong road, starting with Nixon, who did criminal activities, and Iran-Contra, and Newt Gingrich. He just tried to destroy democracy by saying Democrats are demons instead of loyal opposition. He killed the idea of loyal opposition. Yeah. And then all the stuff up into currently, Representative Pascal from New Jersey, that list of all the things they voted against, and the corruption in the Supreme Court. Somebody, it needs to, do you know, does a book already exist, or does it need to be created, which is a reference book and a summary of the political sins of the Republican Party as it has moved from being more acceptable to the falling over the cliff of fascism.
Yeah, it's a good question, Keno.
Or does it need to be created?
There are a number of books that kind of the dance around in that territory, although no titles immediately come to my mind. Maybe the Hidden History of Neoliberalism, my book, is all about how the GOP embraced neoliberalism in 1980, and that was kind of the end of the middle class in America. But Keno, when you first started calling into this program years ago, you said you were a Republican. Maybe you should write the book.
Tom, I would like to write the first chapter, but my local newspaper will not publish my letters anymore.
Oh,
and I need a place. I would start an essay of the first chapter of this book of the sins, the political sins of the Republican Party on the road to fascism, and I would like to do that. But can you suggest where I might?
Yeah, there's two places that I recommend for people who are not well known and easily published to kind of break into publishing and get their feet wet. The first is a news site called opednews.com, OPED news.com. It's run by an old friend of mine, Rob Call is his name. And they will, if it's reasonably well written, they'll publish, anybody's work, and you can develop a following there. Kenyatta used to post there. The second one is medium.com, which is a website devoted to authors, basically, and wannabe authors. And anybody can open an account there and start publishing. You have to pay them, I think it's $5 a month or something like that, to become a member to be able to post. But they actually, people actually, they pay you. They will send you money,
Yeah.
And I posted on Medium for a while, and then I moved over to Substack. But which is a third option. Although I think for somebody just starting out who doesn't have a large platform, Medium is probably the very best place to post. And you could post in both. You could post at both Op-Ed News and Medium.com. And with Medium.com, like I said, they if a lot of people read your article, they will send you money. So
okay, well, I want there needs to be a reference book I submit for consideration for the 24 election. There needs to be a reference book of a summary of the sins that are on the road to fascism.
Well, start writing, Keno. You write a chapter every week, and within 6 months you'll have a book. Or just actually write a page a day, and in 6 months you'll have a book. It's not rocket science. It's just persistence. Keno, it's great to hear from you. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. 10 minutes. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have been pushing legislation and ideas that would basically crash the economy. And a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads going, why would Republicans who basically are owned by billionaires and big corporations, why would they want to crash the economy? Doesn't that hurt billionaires and big corporations? In fact, no, it doesn't. Billionaires and big corporations actually get richer and more profitable during economic crashes. The largest fortunes in America were made during the Great Depression, or some of them. Joe Kennedy, J. Paul Getty, they made a fortune because it was a buying opportunity. Everything was cheap because everything had crashed, so they were buying up stock and buying houses. They had cash. Also, they have more negotiating power with unions, with workers, with their vendors. There's all kinds of benefits to billionaires and big corporations of having a crash. So don't think the Republicans won't do it. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 9 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Angela in New York City. Hey, Angela, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you? I wish I could say I'm calling with some decently happy things to say, but I'm really quite upset today. The issue with trans and LGBTQ is hitting quite close to home for me. My daughter is gay, and some of her good friends are trans, and they're terrified.
Same here.
She had a friend in Florida. I'm sorry. She had a friend in Florida who tried to commit suicide this past weekend.
Oh, no.
I just want to tell everybody that, please, this is just the beginning. I've been saying this since Trump came into power. They're just starting. I don't feel safe letting my kids go out, and I live in New York. And the fact that my daughter is afraid to be here, I'm sorry. I'm terrified. I'm angry. And I'm tired of everybody debating this. I just want everybody to know that they're starting with them. They're starting with LGBTQ people. They're starting with trans, but they're going to come for you and your kids too. Stop debating, because we need to take care of ourselves and defend our families. I can't tell you how scared I am right now. I'm sorry. It's just watching the pain on these kids' faces and worrying about my own family is overwhelming. And I'm so angry. It's been years of this. And I want everyone to know to stop debating, stop talking about Trump, stop talking about the arrests, stop talking about diapers. Nobody cares. Just remember, the Nazi Party is alive and well right now. Fascism, we're not on the road to it. It is here.
Yep.
Okay?
In red state after red state.
Time. Yeah. That's all I wanted to say. I'm sorry. It's only a matter of time, so people, please think about that.
Yeah, look at this young man in Arkansas. He's, a straight, white young man who went to the defense of trans people, and he ended up in jail. I mean, that's in Arkansas. For protesting at a school board meeting, for God's sake. Angela, I share your concern.
Never thought I'd see this. Yeah.
I'm also
I just want everybody to know. Yeah.
I'm also the parent of a gay child, and this whole thing horrifies me. And I'm the uncle of a trans young man.
Yeah.
And it just the whole thing is just. We've got to work on this. We've got to do this. And I think the way that we do it is we wipe out the Republicans in the election of 2024, and maybe they'll get the message that hate isn't the way to win elections. And they want to win elections because they want to have power and wealth. So it seems like that's the starting point.
I don't think the Nazi cared about elections. I don't think the Republicans do either, but that's my feeling. I think we just need to wipe them out. Okay,
I get it, but we can't. I'm sorry, we can't wipe them out. We've got to beat them in the polls. There's really no other way. Angela, thank you for the call. I'm so sorry to hear that you're so concerned. I understand. I absolutely understand. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Hey, I get where she's coming from. I studied the Holocaust from the inside of an Auschwitz gas chamber.
Yeah.
I want to do that again.
Yep.
There was a CBS Miami story about a professor at Florida International University, where I graduated 30 years, history major. History professor was afraid he's going to have to flee Florida like others for fear of DeSantis' crackdown on what I presume is everything related to critical race theory, or what I call white affirmative action for men.
American history is what we're talking about here.
By and large, right. So I'm wondering, would that include the reality of Mayday, little things like the Haymarket riot that I studied, but maybe future generations won't get to? But I have to give you a boring correction. I know you have a lot of faith in boomers and zoomers, and I applaud all their efforts. But remember, something happened to millennials and Gen Xers like me. Gen Xers like me, where our hopes were effectively exported out to the desert of Kuwait, and millennials, their hopes were exported to the deserts of Iraq
and Afghanistan.
But at least with the boomers, the civil rights, it became a quasi civil war for rights here, and the zoomers, by way of COVID, it's become a civil rights.
Yeah, it's like every generation has a crisis.
I'm wrong.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. Generational crises. David, thank you. Thank you for the call. And this is, it's not just going to be boomers and zoomers. Gen Xers and millennials, everybody. I think right across the board in America, people are waking up to this, as Angela correctly said, this fascist Nazi party that has taken over the Republicans.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Tick, tick.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynaphobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. There's some just amazing stories out here. First off, far-right pastors for Trump are being trashed by evangelical leaders for flirting with Christian nationalism. That's a headline over at Raw's Story. Allies of former President Donald Trump, including Roger Stone and Mike Flynn, are backing this far-right Christian group. The group Pastors for Trump is, and this is a quote from Peter Stone, the group pastor who wrote for The Guardian, the group Pastors for Trump is drawing sharp rebukes from mainstream Christian leaders for being extremist, distorting Christian teachings, and endangering American democracy by fueling the spread of Christian nationalism. The Tulsa, Oklahoma-based evangelical pastor and businessman Jackson Lahmeyer leads the fledgling Pastors for Trump organization. He says they have over 7,000 pastors as members, and on May 11th at the Trump Doral golf course in Miami, he's going to unveil their plans at a meeting that Trump is going to attend. Right. Well, Adam Russell Taylor, who runs the Christian organization Sojourners, he said this kind of overt embrace of white Christian nationalism continues to pose a growing threat to the witness of the church and the health of our democracy. This pastor and his effort are trying to impose a Christian theocracy. It's imperative that Christian leaders of all backgrounds, including conservative ones, speak out about this effort as a threat to our democracy and to our church. For years, Trump has tried to co-opt religious leaders to serve his campaign, even attempting to change longstanding tax law to allow dark money to flow through houses of worship. Amen. No pun intended. Also, here we have, there's that. This Ohio church was firebombed for hosting a drag event. Now, there's a kind of a positive story in this. It ends well, but let me just, it's the Community Church of Chesterfield. It's a member of the United Church of Christ, the UCC Church, which is a mainline Protestant denomination that is extraordinarily progressive, genuinely progressive. And a few weeks ago, somebody in the congregation suggested that they do a drag show as a fundraiser for the church. And they thought, hey, let's play to our strengths. They've got a small nucleus of LGBTQ folks in the congregation, including 2 semi-professional drag queens. So they approached the guy, Paul Mendolera, who owns a popular restaurant. It's called Element 41 nearby. And he agreed to host a drag brunch benefit on April 1st, with the proceeds going to the church. And then afterwards, the church would have a drag queen story hour that would be appropriate for young people. And as soon as this guy announced that his restaurant was going to be supporting this church, he said, first of all, he said the positive thing. He said, one of my employees wanted me to do a drag show night or something like that, a drag brunch. my daughter and people in my family, some of our staff, some of our customers, they're all part of the LGBTQ community, and we put a pride flag in the window. Then all hell broke loose. He and the people working at the restaurant started getting calls, quote, threatening violence and or arson if he didn't cancel the adults-only brunch. His personal phone started to ring too, and so did the personal phones of family members, employees. This is what he said, quote, they're calling us pedophiles, and it's getting really crazy where I have to turn my phone off at night. It's taking it to the next level where we're having people saying that they're coming to protest, hundreds of people strong with concealed carry permits, and they want to save the children. They're telling me that we're grooming the children and we're a pedophile restaurant and they're not going to support us and they hope that we burn down. The church started getting threats too. And then on the morning of March 25th, someone threw 2 Molotov cocktails at the church. One at the door of the church and one at a church sign. Somebody destroyed another church sign with a sledgehammer. So things were going bad, so they went to the local law enforcement, the restaurant and the church, and said, hey, please help us out here. And the local police said, nope, sorry. This is from the news report by James Finn over at medium.com. Chester Township Police issued a public statement citing safety concerns and called for canceling the event. Church organizers tell reporters police approached them privately with even stronger advice, citing a lack of willingness to spend police funds to protect the church. So the church pastor, puts this on Facebook, quote, our organizers were asked how police officials could justify to trustees such a large expenditure to keep the LGBTQ community safe. We ask, how can you justify denying an expenditure keeping the LGBT community safe? We understand these hate groups use financial terrorism as a tactic to force police agencies to take sides in situations like this, but choosing the side of the outside hate groups instead of members of this community they have sworn to protect sets a dangerous precedent for future targeted acts like this. Then something interesting happened. Friday of that week, right after this was posted on Facebook, the FBI came to town and arrested a fellow by the name of Eamon D. Penny. He's a 20-year-old in Alliance, Ohio, and he was charged in U.S. District Court with malicious use of explosive materials and possession of a destructive device. Turns out somebody sent a tip to the FBI that this was the guy who firebombed the church. And when he was arrested, he confessed. He said he tried to burn down the Chesterfield Community Church, quote, to protect the children and stop the drag show event, end quote. This must be a guy who watches Fox News or listens to right-wing hate radio to be this cranked up about this. While searching his home, Mr. Penny, FBI agents found a Nazi flag, other Nazi memorabilia, a White Lives Matter of Ohio t-shirt, a gas mask, multiple rolls of blue painter's tape, and gas cans. So, now this guy's in jail, the guy who firebombed the church, and the community church of Chesterfield went on, and they said, we're going to continue. And they held their sold-out drag queen story hour as scheduled. And guess how many protesters showed up? One. One lonely guy dressed all in black, wearing a black face mask, sat on the side of the road near the church looking lonely and dejected. Now, over at the restaurant where they had the drag brunch and drag show, there were a few more protesters, but they were mostly outsiders, mostly from this white supremacist group called Patriot Front. Nazis, white supremacists, Molotov cocktails, arson targeting a church. Apparently, these are the new Ohio Christian values, and, of the police department as well. Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. Meanwhile, it has been revealed that Clarence Thomas helped kill an eviction ban that threatened Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow is the guy who's given Thomas and his wife Ginny millions of dollars in free vacations, flying to like Indonesia or Malaysia or wherever it was, and on a private jet and going out on this 150-foot private yacht, with the whole staff and everybody. And and Thomas issued a statement saying, well, he had no business before the court. Yeah, right. This is from Lever News. This is David Sirota's website, levernews.com. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas voted to end federal tenant protections that his billionaire benefactor's company says threatened its real estate empire's profit margins, according to corporate documents revealed by the lever. Thomas did not disclose his relationship with real estate billionaire Harlan Crow, nor did he recuse himself from the 2021 case, despite its potential impact on Crow Holdings. Now, rent control, which Crow Holdings documents also say threatened the company's business, could come before Thomas in the Supreme Court, and there's no indication if he will recuse himself if or when it does. In August of 2021, Thomas was one of 6 justices who voted to strike down the CDC's moratorium on evictions. It was originally acted in September of 2020. In July, between these two rulings, the Crow Holdings was cited in congressional testimony for being one of the country's most frequent filers of eviction notices, despite the moratorium. This March, Crow Holdings Capital made its interest in ending eviction moratoria explicit, telling investors that its business, quote, may be particularly susceptible to economic effects driven by a pandemic, federal or state restrictions on rent pricing, rent increases, or eviction moratoriums. Bloomberg recently reported that Thomas did not appear to recuse himself in a 2005 Supreme Court case involving Trammell Crow Residential, in which Crow Holdings owned a minority stake. Harlan Crow, of course, is Trammell Crow's son. So here we go. Here we go. We are, in fact, I've got another one about Brett Kavanaugh that I'll tell you about right after the break. I mean, these guys have just, they're all in. They are just all in for corruption. It don't matter to us, right? The Supreme Court song, it don't matter to me, because hey, they think they're completely immune. They don't think Congress will do anything. And they're probably right.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
After all, any effort to regulate the Supreme Court as provided for by Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution will be blocked by a filibuster in the Senate by Republicans. And welcome back. Margot in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. Hey, Margot, what's on your mind today?
Oh, boy, I'm telling you, I'm a wreck. But, they worry about the LGBTQ. There have been different people in our society for how many generations?
Forever.
And who cares? I mean, they're different people. We aren't rubber stamped. But our government, nobody gets riled up about the money that the middle class is being cheated out of or what Trump has done. I mean, for God's sakes, and I'm an atheist, proud to say. Now, where are all these Christians and evangelicals coming from that they don't worry about their fellow man? I mean, it's just gotten insane. And Tom, I'm 77 years old, and I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like this in my life.
Yep.
Voting rights are gone. Women's rights are gone. We're going back 50 years on everything.
Yep.
I don't know what to do except I vote every time I get a chance to vote.
Yep. Well, there is,
people need to wake up.
Amen, Margot. Over at indivisible.org, you can sign up to phone bank from your home. And, if you have unlimited minutes or it doesn't cost you to call long-distance numbers, you could have an impact. You don't have to send them money. They have great talking points for posting things on social media. Democracy Labs is another one that does a great job with this. They've got a regular newsletter. I think it's democracylabs.com. I might be wrong. They also have a Substack newsletter, but you should be able to easily find that with a search engine. And of course, the Democratic Party is always looking for volunteers. You can show up at the local meetings. You can show up virtually. There are things that you can do from home again, and you don't have to give them money if you don't have a lot of money sitting around. So, Margot, there are options. So, excuse me, I would encourage you to get out there and get involved. In fact, Margot just hung up, but thank you, Margot, for calling in. And I hope you don't think that I was calling you out for not doing more. I realize you're voting every time, you're calling into talk shows. That's a big deal. And I'm assuming that, you are talking to people in your community. But I think this is so important that we all realize that the only way that we can defeat this, I mean, these right-wing Republican Nazis have this fantasy that they're going to take over the country with guns by killing people and outlawing people. Outlawing American history. That's their fantasy. I don't think they're going to get there, but they're going to try, right? They've done this in other countries. They've done it in Russia now, recently. They've done it in Hungary recently. Back in the day, they did it in Italy and Spain and Germany. I mean, but it never lasts very long. But they're going to try. And, I think that the most powerful rebuttal that we have is to tell everybody we know what's actually going on. That's why I wrote this op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, where I'm just listing all the ways that the Republican Party is anti-business. And anti-American, for that matter, in my humble opinion. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Supreme Court basically does two things. One, they do under the Constitution. The other, they do under a set of rules that they made up for themselves. The thing they do under the Constitution is they're the final court of appeals. If you're convicted of a crime and you appeal and then you get overturned on appeal and then the government comes back and says, no, we really think he should be convicted. Or if you sue somebody and they sue back and it goes back and forth, there has to be a point someplace where the buck stops. That's the Supreme Court. It's the final court of appeals. They also adjudicate things between states and between the United States and other governments. But the other thing they do that's not in the Constitution is strike down laws because they claim they're not constitutional. And what I'm arguing is that in order to do this, the Supreme Court should have to have an absolute consensus, a unanimous opinion. This could be put into law simply by a simple law of Congress. It doesn't require a constitutional amendment. There's a whole piece about it over at tom.tv. So I was just sharing with you what's up with, with Clarence Thomas. Now we're discovering that, remember when Brett Kavanaugh was charged with, he wasn't legally charged, but, when Christine Blasey Ford alleged that he had tried to rape her and or something close to it, sexually assaulted her. And several other women came forward and said that they were willing to testify, although the Senate Judiciary Committee at that time was run by Chuck Grassley, the Iowa Republican, and he did not allow an awful lot of testimony. One of the things, though, that he did allow, there was this other woman who said that Kavanaugh had exposed himself to her at a drunken frat party, and so a Colorado-based attorney by the name of Joseph C. Smith, Jr., who was a friend and former colleague of the lead counsel for the Judiciary Committee, a guy by the name of Mike Davis, and also a member of the Federalist Society, which strongly supported Kavanaugh's nomination, and appears to have a professional relationship with Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society's co-founder. This guy comes out, and he also thanked Leonard Leo in his book, Under God, George Washington and the Question of Church and State. This guy comes forward and says, no. Deborah Ramirez is mistaken. It wasn't Brett Kavanaugh. It was this other guy by the name of Jack Maxey. Now, Jack Maxey, it turns out, is also a Republican activist. He shared a portable hard drive of data from Hunter Biden's laptop with the media. When he was reached by The Guardian, he said he was in Europe and claimed he had just given the hard drive to Viktor Orban's government in Hungary. Maxey said he obtained it from Rudy Giuliani. So anyhow, this lawyer, Joseph Smith, says, oh, no, it was Maxey. He was the guy who exposed himself. And so Chuck Grassley basically says, okay, nothing to see here. It wasn't Brett Kavanaugh, and move along, move along. Well, now Maxey's coming out and saying, yeah, I'm a Republican. Yeah, I love Brett Kavanaugh, but I was in high school when that happened. I was not in college, so I could not have been at that frat party. In fact, I was in another part of the country in high school. But are we going to reopen this investigation? Are we going to look into this? Somehow I doubt it. Meanwhile, down in Florida, the Florida House of Representatives just passed Senate Bill 7050 by a party line vote, 76-34. It's that lopsided because Florida's that gerrymandered. It would boost the power of the Florida's Office of Election Crimes and Security, the new election police that Ron DeSantis created to intimidate black people. And it would also raise the fine if you are registering voters and you fail to complete a registration application and file it with the state government within 10 days. Currently, the fine is $50,000. They're going to raise it to $250,000. This is why the League of Women Voters has stopped registering people in Florida. An amendment to the bill also allows Ron DeSantis to run for president without having to resign. So I guarantee you he's going to sign this thing. Officials from dozens of voting and civil rights groups have come out and said that Senate Bill 7050 would, quote, make it harder for Floridians to register or to vote and undermine Florida's election administration. It creates more barriers to conducting voter registration drives. It establishes steeper fines for volunteer community-based registration groups. It adds more restrictions on mail-in ballots. It gives the Office of Election and Crimes and Security expanded authority to investigate and prosecute people. And it removes the government's liability for issuing voter registration cards to citizens whose voting rights have not been restored. In other words, ex-prisoners. This is one of the letter's signers. These are the people who are opposed to this legislation. They said provisions within the bill specifically target community-based voter registration groups with enormous fines and draconian new restrictions. These groups have made it possible for many Floridians to exercise the right to vote. 1 out of every 10 black and Latino voters and 1 out of every 50 white voters in Florida have registered with the support of these organizations. This is the third year in a row that Florida's lawmakers have changed our voting rules, attacking community-based groups who support voters and implemented unnecessary and confusing barriers for Floridians who just want to vote, while making no investment in voter education at all.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's all they've got, right? All they've got is hate and fear and suppressing the vote. This is all the Republicans have to sell. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. This is from the introduction, titled The Big Picture of Social Control versus Democracy. This book deals with two very large and often amorphous concepts, privacy and surveillance in the context of government and the marketplace. Both concepts have undergone changes over the millennia of recorded human history, and those changes have dramatically sped up and expanded over the past few centuries, starting with the widespread use of the printing press in the mid to late 15th century, when books and newspapers began to proliferate across Europe, and in the rest of the civilized world by the end of the 17th century, civilized in quotes. The development of radio, television, and the internet in the 20th century heightened the need to define more clearly what both concepts meant and how they applied both to governments, the public sector, and to individual and corporate players, the private sector. The thought police and Big Brother are terms introduced into the popular lexicon by George Orwell in his novel 1984. Big Brother was the overweening, all-powerful government of Orwell's novel, and the thought police were those who managed to burrow so deeply into every citizen's behavior, speech, and even thoughts that they could control or punish behavior based on the slightest deviations from orthodoxy. Orwell was only slightly off the mark. Big brother types of government and thought police types of social control are now widespread in the world and incompatible with democracy, as I'll show in more detail later in the book. Most concerning for Americans and citizens of other democratic nations, in quote, the mentality of both has heavily infiltrated both American government and corporate sectors, reaching so deeply into the day-to-day details of our lives that the techniques and technologies they use can and do not only control, but predict our behavior. The goals of those who violate privacy and use surveillance, social control, and behavior modification. Setting aside pure voyeurism, these are the areas where money is made, power is accumulated, and political or business goals are reached. And whether they are of government or of corporate Big Brother, the goals are largely the same and consistent with those just mentioned. Secrets are now for government and giant corporations to know and hold, but not for average people. And they're used by Big Brother to both acquire and hold power. J. Edgar Hoover had secrets to hide, for example, so he knew well their power. A gay man at the pinnacle of American power for most of his life, the FBI director knew that in many U.S. states, he and his lover, Clyde Tolson, could be prosecuted and sent to prison for their private, consensual behavior. Yet Hoover and Tolson lived together, and their relationship was an open secret among Washington's cognoscenti. I still remember a beautiful summer day in Ireland, Louise and I sitting in the living room of author Anthony Summers and his wife Robin, as they described to us the shocking details of Hoover's life and abuses of power they'd uncovered writing Official and Confidential, The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover. That books like Summers weren't published until after Hoover's death is a striking testimonial to the power of surveillance and the blackmail material it can produce to keep powerful people's secrets hidden even from the world's best investigative journalists. Every politician or reporter of any consequence knew that Hoover had a file on him. They were almost all men back then, and powerful men at that time were far more likely to harbor salacious secrets, ensuring Hoover an unbroken hold over the FBI from its founding in 1935 to his 1977 death. But Hoover didn't use his massive FBI surveillance powers just to cow politicians and reporters. He was also interested in advancing policies close to his heart. A dedicated white supremacist running an FBI where all meaningful power was held in white hands throughout his life, Hoover, or an underling at his behest, famously sent FBI surveillance tapes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. having an extramarital affair to the civil rights leader himself, implying that they'd next go to his wife and the public if he didn't commit suicide. Hoover also spent his entire career downplaying the role of Italian organized crime in the United States because, among other things, mafia godfather Santo Trafficante had the goods on his sexual orientation and regularly hosted him and Tolson for gambling junkets. When, in 1961, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy overruled Hoover and began prosecuting the mob, with the number of cases brought shooting up from dozens annually to over 700 a year in the early 1960s, the mafia backlash eventually destroyed the Kennedy dynasty. There's a more modern story of how surveillance and invasions of privacy have impacted American politics. The rise to the presidency of serial rapist, wannabe fascist, and crooked businessman Donald Trump. The biggest big brother of the corporate world, Facebook, had for years been compiling massive troves of personal data on Americans, even Americans without a Facebook account, as any page with a Facebook logo on it can send your browsing activity back to Facebook. And sometime in the mid-2010s, Cambridge Analytica hired a data scientist to put together an app that could suck down that data without Facebook's knowledge. Cambridge once bragged that they ended up with more than 4,000 data points on each of 230 million Americans. The book, The Hidden History of Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy, by Thom Hartmann. So the witch hunts really began in a big way in the 1500s as a consequence, in large part, of the Protestant Reformation. There was this competition between the Protestant churches and the Catholic churches for who could be most effective at keeping Satan at bay. In other words, punishing the witches. And it became like a competitive thing, you know, it was sort of like Democrats and Republicans competing for your vote. Literally, seriously. In addition, there were attacks on women who were performing abortions. Most of the abortionists in that era were women, and they were being attacked for being witches, and that was because they were denying the feudal lords who owned the serfs and their children cheap labor, which was the children. So you combine these things, and you know, today we're seeing something very similar to both of these dynamics at play. There's a whole video about it over at tom.tv if you want to check it out. That's tom.tv. "35 minutes past the hour, and it seems like there was one other story that I wanted to share with you, and but apparently not. Nope. I guess not. Okay, we will get everything else we will get to in the next hour, and we've got Alex Lawson coming up. So let's pick up your calls. What's on your mind today? Jim in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind? What's up?
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can, just fine. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Yeah. I'm a lib, lefty in the midst of Trump country down here, but I was reading and listening to your today's thing about, you know, the different presidents and how the budget, you know, up and down, whatever, from Republican, Democrat, and all that. And I just, you know, I could look it up, I'm sure, but, you know, I know you're an encyclopedia of knowledge, so maybe you could cut it quick. What would the argument be of you know, saying, well, under Clinton, you know, the budget was balanced, but that was because there was a Republican, you know, Congress, blah, blah, or vice versa, you know,
right.
Or maybe the previous president did this, and now the new guy is feeling the residuals of that. It takes time for everything to kick in. So what would your, you know, explanation of that be?
Well, there's some truth to that, Jim. I mean, you know, sometimes when, although, you know, Democrats had to go along with this stuff, or Republicans had to go along with Democrats on it, I would say that the 4 years of budget surpluses that Clinton had, by and large, were essentially bipartisan, but they weren't so much that Republicans were holding Clinton's feet to the fire. Remember the peace dividend?
Sure.
That's really what it was. I mean, that, you know, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and over the next couple of years, we downscaled our military spending because we no longer, you know, we're anticipating war with the Soviet Union any day now, and now it had become Russia. And throughout the 90s, it was a small d democratic Russia. And so, you know, that was the principal thing, I think, that led to the balanced budget and the 60 some odd billion dollar surplus that Bill Clinton handed off to George W. Bush. You know,
right.
but you know, I'll cop to that. Yeah. But, you know, if Clinton didn't want to have a budget surplus, he could have simply refused to sign the legislation, or he could have whipped the Democrats to fight it. So, you know, I think he can take credit for it. I think he can legitimately take credit for it. Jim, thanks for the call. Dolores in Lake Bay, Washington. Hey, Dolores, what's on your mind today?
I'm one of your old ladies. I'm 87 and irritated.
Okay,
but,
God bless you.
I first want to tell the other gal that indivisible is great. The presidential election, I did 600 postcards for him.
Oh, wow.
So you could, yeah.
Do they send you the postcards and then you fill them out, or do you buy them, or how does that work?
No, they give us who the person is that you're campaigning for,
mm-hmm.
and how to write your message.
That's
and
great.
Some of the candidates put too much on. I want to get to them before they put all this. You need to keep it short, quick, and, you know.
Right.
So that people will pick it up and read it. But I was with some acquaintance over the weekend, and Tom, I just can't figure out how to even talk to these people, because they're all into believing that parents are are letting their children choose at 7 what gender they're to be, and they're cutting off their appendages and all this. And I'm thinking, they really believe this.
Right. Yeah. This is it's called a moral panic, Dolores. You may remember back in the 80s when it was the McMartin preschool and everybody all around the country, they were searching for preschools that were engaging in satanic abuse rituals of children, and you had all these people coming forward saying, yes, this happened to me, and it was all essentially induced, fake memories and stuff, but it created a nationwide moral panic, and it seems like about every 10 to 20 years we have a major moral panic in the United States. There was the one in the 20s was about marijuana and black men raping white women, and there was this huge moral panic around that led to the creation of the DEA and Harry Anslinger and the reefer madness and all that kind of stuff. So this is just the most recent moral panic, and it's one that's being created by Republicans in order to, trash talk people who are basically incapable, generally speaking. I mean, we're talking children here, young people, of defending themselves. They don't have the money, they don't have the agency, they don't have the access to the media. They're relatively innocent victims, and so of these Republican pogroms. So that's what's going on. Dolores, thank you for sharing your story with me, and good on you for sending out all those postcards with indivisible.org. That's marvelous. Thank you. Paulette in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hey, Paulette, what's on your mind today?
Yes, great show today, Tom.
Thank you.
And it was great meeting you when you be out here a number of years ago doing book signings. So nice to meet you. I have been wanting to ask you, and it's the environmentalist in me that's started questioning this, and you're such a good researcher, you might know more about this. I've been wondering, geez, do we have a growing number of LGBT population? Is it seem like it only because social acceptance has been there for the last 10 years or so and they're coming out more? Or is there a biological reason? And I got to looking at the National Library of Medicine and stuff. And what's interesting is endocrine disorders are caused by environmental toxins. There's something called endocrine disrupting chemicals,
right?
Which we know who makes the environment more toxic. 40 years of Republicans. Anyway, so there's something called hormone disruptors linked to genital changes and sexual preference. So, and even affecting children, and noted in children before they were born.
Yep.
They're seeing some kind of the endocrine system changes. Do you know anything about this, or if not a whole lot? You're such a great researcher. I thought you might find it interesting.
I do, Paulette, and there's a robust debate going on in a very small subset of science, which are the people who study these kinds of things, these endocrine disruptors. Certain plastics and certain plasticizers are the major endocrine disruptors, and so they end up in our water supply. And we know that they're disrupting the reproductive biology of amphibians, in particular frogs and salamanders and things. Whether they're having that impact on humans is an open question, and if so, to what extent is another open question. That science is far from solved. And the reality, the simple reality, is that there are records of trans people, that go back as far as human.
Oh, I know.
And of course, gays and lesbians. So I don't think that we need to look to chemistry, as a villain here. Although I think the bigger concern,
growing population that is coinciding with their increase in toxins in the environment.
Yeah, well, the bigger concern is that the hormone disrupting chemicals, while they may not be causing people to change their gender preference or identity or whatever, that they cause hormone-related cancers. We're seeing a huge spike in breast cancers, uterine cancers, ovarian cancers, and prostate cancers. Yeah. And those are fairly clearly tied to these endocrine disruptors. So I think probably that's the area where most of the research is being focused. But for right now, I think it's important that we just acknowledge that that the LGBTQ community has always been with us throughout the history of humanity. That non-gender conforming animals exist in every biological species, and particularly among mammals, but also in birds and fish. And we need to have understanding and compassion and love for our brothers, sisters, and for the entire community of humanity. I mean, we're all just people here. Paulette, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Good talking to you. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program, the place where despair is not an option. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann program, helping you win the water cooler wars. And welcome back. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for the hard work you, Louise, and your crew there do. Honest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good addiction for me. Anyway, on this hate on gays, and it's just too much. I had to call in. Thank God for cannabis. This is the only way I can handle it, because I grew up in the hate. You ever hear a movie called Last Exit Out of Brooklyn? There was a book written.
I have heard of it. I never saw it, but I remember when it came out.
Yeah, there was a book, Underbelly of Society. You know what I mean? That's how I grew up. And somehow I escaped that. I had no problem. We call them winka, gay. It's a Sioux term. It sounds more kind. And the hatred. Like, there's a commercial on TV. I got a 9-year-old. We raised as a little pollywog. Anyway, Papa, look, 2 men kissing. Don't worry about it. That's love. Love, okay? Yeah. Don't listen to the hate. Yep. It's the only way with the young generation. They're wise. They are wise. And to me, it disturbs me. The hate. I mean, come on. Myself, I went to a club. I met a gentleman. I was talking to Joyce in the gym. Anyway, I look up, not my day for boys. So, it didn't threaten me. So, hey, what do you guys do? We hang out over here, I guess, as a nightclub. So I went over there to investigate. Sure, I was drinking a little, and I said, wow, men dancing with men. So, big surprise. The surprise was a guy came up, would you care to dance? What? Would you care to dance? And I'm straight, right?
Right.
Oh, no, thanks. I'm going steady with this guy over here. Well, you're afraid? Yes, he'll beat me. Wait, to get out of it. So to me, there was no threat. My dad, World War II veteran, tough guy, had a friend that gay couple. He had no problems with it. So I guess I'm grateful I wasn't raised with that type of hatred.
Yeah.
So the answer, Tom, what is the answer? Talk. Don't be afraid. They're different, right? Growing up in the 50s, I was targeted. Dirty Mexican. I'm not even Mexican. You understand? So we have to, God forbid, we had aliens to visit. We shoot them. What is it, Tom?
Yeah.
What is it? Fear, hopelessness, and what's the other term you put? Is Republicans, the Supreme Court will run riot? The 6 of them.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. We have a problem, Bobby, with this Supreme Court. But I think the thing that you identified, the number one thing that you identified, which is this hate of gay people, and and lesbians and trans people, it's a poison. It's just a poison, and it's been a poison in our society for as long as we've had organized society. And I think that, frankly, my take on it is that it's kind of a Marxist analysis that there's economics behind this. That every group that you can marginalize out of society, that you can push out of the way, starting with women and then going to people who are whose skin looks different than yours, and then going to people who have a different gender identity than you. Every group that you can push out of the way and you can marginalize means that the economic pie gets larger for basically straight white men. And that's why I think it's been running that way forever, and I think it'll continue to. These Republican groups and people like them and aligned with them are going to continue to be hating on the queer community because, it's useful for them. There's a benefit to them. Bobby, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole video about it with all the details over at tom.tv. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. And Seth in Christiansburg, Virginia, you wanted to weigh in on Hotel California?
Yeah, I did. Tom, I'm really sick of the Christian caliphate. Abortion, gun control, gays, all this stuff is just really busybody stuff. And your caller that called in is just another example of it. I just looked up the lyrics for Hotel California, and the guy is driving along, and he goes to this place, and he said, this could be heaven or this could be hell. And that's the only reference to hell. And it's a figure of speech. What he's saying is this could be good or this could be bad.
Right. Okay.
It's not about some Christian ethic of hell. It's crazy.
I get it.
They're nuts, Tom.
I get it.
They're nuts.
It. Okay, Seth.
Books.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Like I said, I've remembered the song really well. In fact, it's running in my head right now. A little earworm there, but I don't recall the lyrics. Other than just little fragments, from the refrains. Colleen in Concord, California. Hey, Colleen, what's on your mind today?
I came across this older thing about connecting slavery to social welfare, and I got to it trying to trace back something with Coke. And can I just read you a little bit of it? It's about the law of Moses.
Why don't you just summarize it for us, Colleen? Unless you're a professional reader.
I don't know that I can, but it says the slavery thus functioned as social welfare program in which the buyer paid the slave ahead of time for the number of years of work he would perform and provided the slaves room and board. This allowed the Israelite time and resources to clear his debts and get a fresh start. And once again, it affirmed his value as a human being by giving him the opportunity.
Slavery reaffirms your value as a human being. Where are you getting this from, Colleen?
And it gets worse and worse and worse. It's called Obligations of the Rich. The site is tifw.org/rich-and-poor-2/. And I got to this trying to trace back the guy they hired to do the map in New York, and then it goes on after this Acton group that Coke contributes to. They're using this to indoctrinate or force prisoners to to be religious.
Oh, geez.
And
the Christian
and
Caliphate, to quote my previous caller.
And guess whose prison ministry this is? Charles Chuck Colson's.
Oh,
and Mansfield Fraser wrote this article. These are a little bit older, but Nixon's henchmen launched the largest prison ministry in America.
Yeah.
And he says it violates the First Amendment, and he's so right. And anyway, the article that Mansfield Fraser wrote was in the Daily Beast back in July 13, 2017, and nothing's been done about this. They're still forcing these people, and if they don't, and if their families, and if they don't go along, they don't get certain little benefits.
Right.
And it just made me so angry. You know, it just between the Acton Institute that Koch gives hundreds of $800 and something thousand dollars. It's just so maddening that this is how they are indoctrinating not only prisoners, but especially in Florida, but students in our K through 12. I mean, it's just, it's all.
Colleen, can you tweet that article at me?
I'll try. I'm not a big tweeter, but
okay. I'd love to see it.
I'll find you.
I'd love to see it. I do need to move along, but thanks for alerting us, Colleen. I appreciate it. Thank you. Janet in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Janet, what's on your mind today?
I'm thinking about the peace dividend that was a part of the George H.W. Bush administration. Mm-hmm. At that time, William Barr was his attorney general.
Right.
And he said that now that we have all of this money that we don't have to spend on war in Russia, we can put it into our inner cities and take out gangs.
That didn't work out. I mean, that never happened to the best of my knowledge, did it?
Well, that's what they tried to do. I mean, during that time, it was the weed and seed program that they invented, that they take out all of the undesirable black kids in a neighborhood and leave the desirable ones.
I remember when George Herbert Walker Bush.
So all you had to do, if you were a city, you could
go ahead.
Out the undesirable weeds.
Yeah, no, I get it, Janet. Yeah, that was a pretty grim time. I remember when George Herbert Walker Bush even set up a kid to be arrested in the park across the street from the White House just so that he could wave a bag of crack cocaine or cocaine on television as he was announcing a crackdown. That was a grim time. Janet, thank you for the call. It's the top of the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough, the 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court, functionally awarded Bush the presidency. He covered this in 2001 in two major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Alex Lawson, the executive director over at Social Security Works, strengthensocialsecurity.org or socialsecurityworks.org, SSWorks on Twitter, and ALaw202 on Twitter. And Alex, welcome back to the program. 217 Republicans just voted to cut Social Security is the headline. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so last week, first, Tom, thanks for having me, as always. Last week was a busy week in Washington, D.C. The Republicans working as hard as they could to ram through the House a bill that would devastate Social Security, the Veterans Affairs, so the VA and the Social Security Administration. I mean, just absolutely devastating cuts. And they would spur office closings across the country. I mean, they're so, I think, you know, Tom, you and I have seen stuff like this before where the Republicans are demanding cuts and they're calling them anything but cuts, right? Spending caps, da-da-da-da-da. But I do think that something that's new here is just how, I don't know, like crazy the magnitude of what they put in there is. And I think it is the only way that McCarthy could get to the votes that he needed to get to, right? He literally gave just the Marjorie Taylor Greene caucus whatever they asked for.
Right, the Sedition Caucus.
The Sedition Caucus.
Yeah.
You know, he knows that this is dead on arrival in the Senate. So his pitch was literally like, oh, don't worry about it. You can vote for these things because, you know, it's actually the negotiation is going to move over to the Senate. But the truth is, I mean, these guys just voted to cut Social Security and veterans benefits, 217 of them. Almost the entire caucus, Tom, voted for it. They didn't talk about it. They didn't muse about it. They put their name affirmatively on the vote to pass it out of the House.
Let's hope the Democrats have enough political common sense to turn this into ads for all 217 of them, because every single one of them is standing for re-election a year from November.
Absolutely. So I hope, and there's every indication that that is going to be the case. We're going to do what small part we can at Social Security Works to lead the way. We've got a billboard up in Rep. Valadeo's district, which is in California, California 23. And that's one of the, there's a bunch of districts, Tom, as you and your listeners know, they're Biden districts. So they're districts that voted for Joe Biden.
Yeah, there's like 18 of them, right?
Exactly. And those are the ones where it's actually, you know, it's a Biden district by plus something. There's another like 17 of them where it's just barely a Trump district, right? So the playing field for the Republicans that they have to defend is pretty large. And we've got a billboard up today. Rep. Valadeo voted to cut Social Security and veterans benefits. Call and then his local office number. We've already got a protest planned for next week where we're going to get seniors and veterans down to his office. And I feel like the moderates, Tom, I don't really get why they were so blasé about voting for this. Did they not think that there'd be a huge reaction, that it was something so out of step with their district? It's sort of mind-boggling when, you know, people make such huge missteps, but
they understand the media, Alex. The math that they're doing is that if Democrats had voted to give I don't know, nationally, free vacations to Disneyland or something, whatever, just any kind of random thing that you could say, hey, that's pretty weird, it would be national news. But when Republicans vote to end Social Security or gut Social Security in this case, I watched a bunch of the Sunday shows this weekend, and I didn't even see it mentioned on any of them. The Republicans knew that the American, mainstream corporate press is not going to call them out for trying to gut Social Security, because most of the American mainstream corporate press is owned by people whose first loyalties are to the Republican Party. So unless I missed something, I mean, tell me, do you know of any national media outside of maybe a single mention on Joy Reid or Chris Hayes on MSNBC that really made a big deal about this? I just haven't seen it anywhere.
Yeah, I've long passed the time when I'm waiting for the corporate media to tell our story, Tom. Sometimes they do when we, box them in. But you're right. I mean, like when you're watching corporate media, you got to watch the commercials in between the show. And remember that that's who runs the show. Those are the bosses, are the people who put the commercials on. Pharma, big insurance. So, I do think you're right that the corporate media is not going to run with this that much. But there is another angle to it, which is the White House. President Biden continues to hammer on this. He sees it really clearly. He's pushing a clean debt ceiling raise, and he's doing it by attacking the Republicans on their plans on Social Security and Medicare. And we're seeing the same thing out of the Senate, with Chuck Schumer saying that's where he is as well. So I do think that is getting media attention. And as long as the Democrats stay on the on offense here and just keep hammering away at what the Republicans have done, where there's been little moments is when the Republicans, cry out in terror or anger that they're being called out for doing exactly what they are doing. Right. There was, from the House floor, they're saying, why are you accusing us of cutting veterans benefits? And everyone's like, because you are, man. That's what's in there. That's what's in there. It's what you did.
Yeah. So Alex, you said you've got a billboard in the district of one of these 18 Republicans who are in a district that voted for Biden. We had a conversation. I had a conversation with a caller last week who was calling up and asking, hey, pardon me, I had to sneeze, who called up and was asking, what does it cost for a billboard? Is this something we can do? First of all, what does it cost? And I'm assuming that people can support you at socialsecurityworks.org if they want to kick in for, chip in to help out with these kind of things. But is it something that even local activists can do? Our billboard, I remember years ago, more than a decade ago when I was doing local radio here in Portland, we could buy billboards for, a few $100s a month on the main freeways through Portland. It was a little over $1,000 a month. They weren't that expensive. What's happened to the price of billboards?
It depends on your media market, obviously, Tom, as you know. They're a little more expensive than that. But a few grand for, a good placement. Yeah. The key thing that I would note, though, is I don't think grassroots activists, unless there's a really good shtick, right? Like, unless you got a really good angle, like the billboard right above their office or something. Mm-hmm. I actually think grassroots wise, the best thing to do is to just gather. You don't need many, gather 4 people and go to their offices, right? Go to their local district offices with signs that you just made on poster board, hands off our Social Security and let the media know. Exactly. I think that has a lot more impact for the grassroots. So what we're always trying to do with our billboards is actually sort of signify that we're doing something in that district. and then we try to move it to a billboard truck so that we can have the truck sort of follow the Republican around or show up at the protests outside their office, more as a way of showing the grassroots that, we're working on this. So definitely you can come to socialsecurityworks.org and plug into all of our activities. We are going to grow this campaign with our partners and allies in the districts into every single one of those districts. There's already some amazing work being done on that front. WFP in New York, the California Alliance for Retired Americans in California, for example, and we're going to partner with both of them. But really, I think the thing to do if you are grassroots and you're angry and you're looking to get involved is get organized. Find an organization that's doing stuff in your area, local indivisible, the Working Families Party I just mentioned, or an organization like California Alliance for Retired Americans.
Local Democratic Party.
Local Democratic Party. Find your people, get organized, and stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Right. And if you can get the media to show up at an event about these Republicans voting to cut Social Security, you just damaged that person's ability to get reelected by a sizable amount. So do not discount what you can do by just getting the word out about what these Republicans are up to.
Amen. We're talking with Alex Lawson, Executive Director of Social Security Works. And Alex, as you recall from back in the days when you used to fill in for me here on this program, I am coming up against a hard break here in about a minute and a half. But I did want to ask you, what is the state of play with Social Security right now? The leadership of the Social Security Administration, the possibility of raising the cap, possible legislation, the possible success of Republican attacks on Social Security. Where are we at?
I think, it's really dangerous. You and your listeners understand this setup: a Democrat in the House, Republicans in control of the Democrat in the White House, Republicans in control of the House, holding the debt ceiling hostage. This is the most dangerous setup for Social Security. So it's very possible that they could ram through something tied to, a full-scale economic collapse that otherwise they couldn't do through regular order. That could be direct cuts. We're hitting them pretty hard. So I think a more likely alternative is that all these sensible people, will start trotting out on the Sunday shows and talking about a commission, a fast-track commission.
Yes,
so that
I'm hearing
right.
That.
I mean,
I remember Simpson Bowles,
or Bowles Simpson, the BS commission.
Right.
So those are real threats to Social Security right now. Again, the Biden White House has rejected those. He called the Bowles-Simpson Commission idea, Romney's Trust Act, he called it a death panel. So that's pretty significant. This is a real fight right now, and we have to defeat all of the Republican attacks using the debt ceiling as a hostage. But all we have to do to do that is let people know that's what they're doing. They're holding the world economy hostage so that they can steal your Social Security and Medicare.
Right.
Make them defend that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Alex Lawson, socialsecurityworks.org is the website. Be sure to check it out. SS Works on Twitter. Alex, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great speaking with you. Thank you. We'll be right back. I got to tell you about Greg Abbott and right-wing media and wildfires in Anchorage. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Charles in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking my call, sir. Happy Monday, and hello to your other time zone listeners. I called for something I consider somewhat serious and your advice in the situation, in that I work part time at a nonprofit thrift store here in Southwest Washington that serves as a fundraiser for the Southwest Washington Humane Society. Mm-hmm. So I do certain janitorial duties and this and that. And so I'm up in the office of one of the managers, and we're discussing a painting project. Anyway, look to my right, and there sitting on the table is a stack of MAGA hats. And so I was kind of shocked. It might be minor, but, you know, the way I feel, my feelings are that, well, why don't you just hang a Confederate flag there? Or, you know, how about a swastika? I mean, to me, it was very offensive. Now, maybe I'm taking it too seriously. I surely might be. But how would you frame that, and how would you think of it would warrant a response, if any? Well, if you're in an employment situation and you value your employment, it's probably not a good idea to challenge your employer about politics. You know, it's sort of like the rule of not discussing politics at Thanksgiving dinner. Beyond that, I'm a big fan of people just speaking their truths, you know, and saying, you know, that whole MAGA movement seems to me like something that's not, you know, not consistent with American values or even Christian values. I'm surprised that you're part of it. You know, and that would be, you know, a gentle opening for that person to speak, and then maybe you could have a reasonable conversation. I don't know. You know. Well, you know, I appreciate your perspective, but from my experience, sir, the squeaky wheel doesn't always get oiled. It just sometimes gets thrown off the wagon train. You know? No, that was my point. If it's you know, if it's your employer, you may not want to do that. But I totally get it. Anyway. Yeah. Well, good luck, Charles. Hey, love your show, man. I respect you greatly, and I'll tell everybody about. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching us on Facebook Live there. I appreciate that. Gregory in Ventura, California. Hey, Gregory, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you? I'm well. I'm well. Well, good. Yeah. By the way, you're doing extra stellar work lately. Thank you. I just want to let you know. But I'm calling. Bill Clinton was mentioned a few calls ago. Are you aware of Clinton's mini involvement in the Iran-Contra? No. About MENA. Well, here's the deal. And I got this from a book that was given to me by one of the ladies years ago who helped burn down the Bank of America at University of California, Santa Barbara. Yeah. So I can dig out the book. We just have 20 seconds, Greg. You need to get, or Greg, here we go. To get your point. All right. Here's the point. In Iran-Contra, the drop was the airstrip in Mena, Arkansas. To do that, to do the drugs for the arms, to get that airstrip to do that drop, they had to get the permission from the governor, which was Bill Clinton, Slick Willie. And I voted for him twice. Anyway, so Bill Clinton then was promised supposedly promised the presidency or something, but Clinton was a shadow guy in Iran-Contra in the sense that he had to get permission for that MENA, M-I-N-A. Okay, and that was presumably the one bringing drugs back up from South America. Central America. The same thing in Texas. I don't know anything about that, Gregory. I'll have to fact check it. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we have this major culture war going on in the United States. You've got Republicans trying to ban abortion. They're trying to ban books. Not just trying to, they're actually doing all of these things. Banning books, banning trans girls in sports, attacking basically the entire queer community. Whatever they can to try to sow division and hate, promoting Nazi memes, talking about how, Jews are paying to have black and brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Oh, yeah, that's right. If they can get us fighting against each other, if they can get us hating each other, we will ignore their efforts to cut their taxes and deregulate their industries. There's a whole video about it at tom.tv. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour, neither compassion nor leadership." There is a massive manhunt underway in the area around Cleveland, Texas, for this guy who
who shot his next-door neighbors, killed a couple of children and a few adults with an AR-15 after they had asked him to stop shooting it because the kids were trying to sleep. And he came over to their house and just murdered them. 9-year-old Danielle Enrique Lazo Guzman and Sonia Argentina Guzman. And well, anyway, the whole list, a 9-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 21-year-old, a 31-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And so, you know, you would think that the governor would come out and say, this is a terrible tragedy, and maybe we should do something about these AR-15s that make it so easy to murder so many people so quickly. But instead, he comes out and he says, speaking of the victims, oh, they're illegal, they're illegals. And it turns out, actually, you know, one of them is a permanent resident of the United States. In fact, there's a tweet late Sunday night showing this guy's ID. One of the people who was murdered was fully legal here, and the person who shared that says, "But I guess to Greg Abbott, anyone who's from another country is an illegal immigrant. This is shameful." Charlie Sykes on TV, he said, "This cried out for a little bit of compassion or some leadership. Of course, we got neither." This is pathetic. But, you know, hey, it's Republicans. Any opportunity to take a tragedy or anything and turn it into more hate for brown-skinned people is something the Republicans will always do. And Greg Abbott, of course, you know, I mean, you know, him and Ron DeSantis and just the whole crowd of them. I mean, you know, we've got all these, you know, Kristi Noem, and we've got all these Republican governors who are just like gleeful about this. And Greg Abbott even said, "Oh yeah, this is partly Biden's fault because he's got an open border." We don't have an open border, but Republicans constantly say it. And then all these Republican statements about open borders get used by the coyotes down south to convince people that, hey, just give me $1,000 and I'll get you up there to that open border. Look at this. Ted Cruz says it's open. Greg Abbott says it's open. He's the governor of Texas. He's got to know. This is just terrible. Somewhere between, you know, pathetic and disgusting, the way that the Republicans are trying to message this. And it's all over right-wing hate radio and Fox News right now. Oh, it's illegal immigrants.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is what happens. I mean, this would have been a fist fight without the gun, right? This is what happens when you have a gun or a country that is saturated with guns.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved, then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
We have a brand new site with everything you need to know about the Thom Hartmann program over at thom.tv. That's THOM.tv. Check it out. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long.
We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. You can check it out at tom.tv. 35 minutes past the hour. A quick geeky science for you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Wildfires in Alaska, in Anchorage. It's been a while since I've been to Anchorage. We've done our show from there a number of times. We used to have an affiliate up there. But the new reality in Alaska's largest city, where a recent series of wildfires near Anchorage have sparked concern. This is the hottest day on record recently. They're very concerned that there might be, major fires actually coming into the city. There's one particular neighborhood. It's called the Hillside, Anchorage Hillside neighborhood. And they built up the side of a slope, a steep slope, and there's forest all around it and kind of through it. It's about 35,000 people live there. And there's only one road in and out. They're getting very, very concerned about this. This is climate change. This is climate change on steroids. The U.S. is heading into an El Nino this year, also this fire season, which means that it will probably be a worse fire season than it would normally be. Just last year, 4,844 square miles burned. That's an area about the size of Connecticut, burned in Alaska. Climate change is not slowing down. All righty, picking up your phone calls here. Dynamo in Minneapolis. Hey, Dynamo, what's up?
Hey, speaking of climate change, Tom, I moved to Duluth in January, so Dynamo Dave of Duluth.
Okay.
By the way, longtime guest Bernie Sanders, I understand, endorsed Mr. Biden without any conditions, and I think, well, if that's the case, then we ought to nominate Thom Hartmann, you, as President of the United States.
No, thanks.
Or in the Democratic Party. No,
yeah.
thanks.
No, thanks.
Hey, by the way, you give Howard Zinn a run for his money as far as history in the U.S. You've got so many great books.
Oh, thank you.
I want to put a plug out there for you. Oh, and by the way, the Department of Transportation last statistics came out in 2020 saying about 38,000 people died as a result of motor vehicle injuries. Mm-hmm. And then CDC in 2020 also put out a stat saying like 45,000 people died as a result of results of injuries to firearms.
Right.
This isn't my idea. I heard it on Matt McNeil show. It's like, if you're going to be insured, you got to be insured to, have a car. Well, maybe you should have insurance. If you're going to buy a gun, everybody's got a gun's got to have insurance.
Yeah, I think, what's rational for cars, the reason that we do registration, insurance, and licensure with cars is because they can kill people, accidentally, but they can kill people. Well, guns are actually designed to kill people. So you would think that, registration, licensure, and insurance, liability insurance, would be a no-brainer for guns. I've been saying this for years, Dynamo. It was one of the major suggestions that I have in my book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. I'm spot on with you. Thank you so much, and thanks for listening to AM 950. Mary in Casper, Wyoming. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hello, Tom. I would like to respond to the earlier lady that was talking about why are we seeing so many gay people, and her comment about how it was the chemicals and that kind of thing.
Right.
Actually, I think what happened, because like her, when I was younger and I first heard about homosexuals or whatever, I didn't understand it. I was confused, but didn't see much of it, so I thought it had to be an aberration. But in the 60s, when the hippies started, a lot of people just think it was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It wasn't. It was about a lot more. it was about accepting everybody as equal. But back then, music was our internet. And so here are the hippies saying peace, love to everybody, and we accept everybody the way that they are. But the music made it cool. And it was one band in particular, the Kinks, with Ray Davies, who wrote a song called Lola.
Oh, yeah.
About a trans, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And he started it, but then there were many more, of course, coming out and talking about that it was, and he also had a song about called Out of the Wardrobe. It was about a man who was married but liked to dress up in women's clothes. And it's a really good song. But anyway, by making those out there, that's when they started coming out. That's when I noticed. I looked around and, oh my goodness, there's a lot of them. And so I've come to the conclusion that it's not an aberration of nature. It could be chemicals affecting, but I don't think so. I think they've always been here, and it's just another part of humanity.
I agree. And history agrees with you, and I do think that these chemicals, these gender-bending chemicals are dangerous, but I think that they're dangerous in as much as they're probably causing cancers and other kinds of physical deformities rather than, influencing things like gender identity. Although, this is up to science, but the essential humanity of other people, regardless of, why they may be different than, quote, the norm. I mean, just the whole idea of normal is itself bizarre. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, does not have the word normal in it. I mean, because there's really no such thing. There's a, you could put people on a bell curve. You can graph it, and you can say, okay, here's the midpoint. Here's the kind of the norm or something. But that doesn't mean normal. I mean, we're all weird in some way. We're all unusual in some way. We're all deviating from the norm in some way. Every single one of us. And it's our job has to be to accept other humans as humans. And I would say to the people who invoke the name of Jesus in Christianity to support their hate, that is absolutely not what that man was teaching, assuming that he was a real figure and he actually said the things that are in the Bible. It was absolutely not what he was teaching. Mary, thank you. Thank you for the call. Spot on. Kathleen in Vacaville, California. Hey, Kathleen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. What's up?
Good. I don't know. I've been listening to all the callers before me, and they all have very good points regarding the hate, the shock and awe. The Republican message is so scary. And longtime supporter of SFTV, I tell everybody to watch it and send money monthly.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. But what did you call about?
When I heard the message, the report that Arkansas is trying to pass a law of who can go in what bathroom. Right. Which is ridiculous, as my grandson would say. Yeah. Ridiculous. I have been out to conferences, bars, events, and when the ladies' restroom line is long, I will go. If I have to go, I have to go. So
go to the men's room.
I have to. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
I've seen that happen.
I'm like, who cares?
What's the big deal?
Who cares? Yeah, exactly. It's like so stupid that they are spending taxpayer money in Arkansas
to police bathrooms. Ridiculous. Yeah, it's this was a school board meeting, but just this whole idea of the Republican Party that you know, at one time under Eisenhower, I mean, you know, Eisenhower ran for election in 52 and re-election in 56 on a platform of expanding Social Security and strengthening labor unions. And that same Republican Party has now become the bathroom police and the vagina police or the uterus police. I mean,
that's what we should call them. Yeah, they become the bathroom police, the coochie police. Sorry, I hope that wasn't a bad word.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what the word was, so don't repeat it, just in case. But
okay,
Kathleen,
well,
yes, I'm with you.
They become the police of women's bodies.
Yes.
They have, it's hate and fear and shock and awe.
Yeah, there you go. Kathleen, thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann program in just a moment. It's Talk Media for the rest of us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Gary in Houston, Texas. Hey, Gary, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I saw an article this weekend where Kevin McCarthy was getting interviewed, and they were asking him. And in that interview, he commented that Disney should stick to their business and stay out of politics.
Right.
And so I'm seeing this, and I'm like, the Democrats should seize on this. It should be the top headline, and we should immediately reintroduce legislation this week in the House to overturn Citizens United. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think the flip side of that is that Ron DeSantis should stick to politics and stay out of Disney's business decisions. I mean, basically, he's telling this company that they should not have opinions, and that they should not. And frankly, what Disney was doing was defending their gay customers, and they have a lot of them, and they were defending their gay employees, gay, lesbian, trans, you know, the whole queer community. Disney was just defending these folks. And, you know, you can call that political. I call that human. So yeah, I'm with you, Gary. And I think it does demonstrate not so much the corruption that comes along with Citizens United as just the general corruption of the Republican Party. But your point's well taken. Gary, thank you for the call. Pearson in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Pearson, what's up?
You buy my idea about electoral politics for presidential elections only, I'd like to point out to Republicans and evangelicals who like to point to sunspot activity and hurricane and plate tectonics and other weather-related phenomenon before industrial human activity affected climate disruption, that there has been homosexuality and transgender expression going back as far as we can tell in human history and in the animal kingdom before frog DNA was being affected by chemical pollution that they like to point out.
Yep. Yeah, my point that this has been with us forever. Most Native American societies have words to describe people who are gay or trans, and those words are not pejoratives, they're not slurs. And in some societies, they're actually, such folks are elevated, essentially. And that goes back 50,000 years on this continent. Or at least 25,000 years. You've got, right across the species spectrum, you've got, Louise and I used to have a pair of ducks, two male ducks that were a couple. In fact, they tried to hump each other. We called them Adam and Steve. And, they lived on our back deck when we lived in a floating home down on the Willamette River. Used to talk about them on the air all the time. And this is just part of nature. This is, we like I said, there is no such thing as normal. We are all weird in our own ways, and I don't mean weird in a negative sense. I mean, We are all different than quote the norm. But now we've got the Republican bathroom police and the Republican vagina or uterus police who are trying to tell us that we all have to live a certain way, we all have to think a certain way, we all have to look and dress a certain way. And oh my God, if you dress the wrong way and you try to use the bathroom, this is nuts. Kirsten, thank you for the call. Spot on. This is just nuts. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio and tag you're it. So back in the 1980s, Louise and I lived in Germany for a year, and one of the stories that I remember hearing from some of the older people who were there in Stadtsteinach, who had been alive during the Hitler era, was that the radio and television stations, well, they didn't have television stations, but the radio stations and the newspapers back then had, on radio, it was a particular time of the day, and in newspapers, a particular part of the paper, where people could write in or people could call in and denounce their neighbors for being gay or for being disloyal or for being secretly Jewish. And that would then cause the neighbors to all go after them because it was a matter of public record. Now, anything states do in the United States is a matter of public record. The Attorney General of Missouri, Andrew Bailey, has just put up a form on the government's website, the Transgender Center Concerns form, where you can report your neighbors for dressing up as women. This is nuts. Check it out. There's a whole piece about it at tom.tv. And it's 9 minutes before the hour. John in Portland. Hey, John, what's on your mind today? That's a strange noise. Okay, I'm going to put John on hold because normally he's totally with it. How about John in West Allis, Wisconsin? Hey, John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Just fine, thank you.
Okay, so what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to get back to Social Security and Medicare and the disingenuous and hypocrisy of Republicans on those fronts. Both of those are prepaid programs. We pay into them all our lives, and I know this has been covered before. I don't think I've heard this though before, and I'm pretty sure I read this, that not only that, but national debt, and we got to reduce the national debt and reduce the deficit. Of course, these are still the same people who are doing wonderful things like giving a $2 trillion welfare tax break to billionaires and huge corporations. These are people that are throwing $20, $30, $40 billion of money.
Yeah, no, I get it. John, I think you've got a call coming in because it sounds like your caller ID is breaking up. I've got to move along. Phil in Aurora, South Dakota. Hey, Phil, what's on your mind today?
What they really want to, as far as Social Security cuts, what they're talking about entitled. Does anybody know?
Oh, geez. I think we're having a Comcast problem again. I just lost Phil. Let's try another one here. Patty in Alvin, Texas. Hey, Patty, can you hear me?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, so what's on your mind?
Okay, so I wanted to verify something with you. I read a long time
Oh, Patty,
ago,
I'm so sorry. It's breaking up terribly. Yeah, I know that Comcast is doing. There's a big construction project down the street from us, a big apartment building that they're building, and I have a feeling they're rerouting their internet lines, but I just don't know. But Patty, you want to try it again?
Okay, I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I remember you. I think I remember you saying a long time ago that according to scientists, we have not entered the correct?
No, I'm sorry. I heard the first half of it, but not the last half. I'm gonna try one other caller here, Patty. I'm sorry. We'll call back again tomorrow. Scott in Denver. Hey, you want to try this, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely Comcast. I'm very sorry, Scott and Patty and Sandy and Johan and everybody else who's on hold here. I'm going to have to just kill off the phones for a few minutes. Florida Governor Ron, and just give you a little news here. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis blew up at a reporter in Jerusalem. This is interesting. There's a Guantanamo Bay inmate who is now free. He was innocent. And he was being tortured, and Ron DeSantis was standing there watching and smiling. And a reporter in Jerusalem asked him about this. DeSantis was a lawyer for the Navy at the time, a JAG lawyer. I think it's Justice. I'm not sure what JAG stands for. Anyway, it's and they're the lawyers, the military lawyers. And this guy, Ahmed Abdelaziz, he was a Mauritanian inmate at Camp Delta. He said there was a colonel and DeSantis. They were looking at each other and they were just smiling. He says dirty things were perpetrated. He saw everything, and I guarantee you he never objected. So anyhow, this reporter asks DeSantis about it when he's in Jerusalem trying to prove that he's got national security chops. And DeSantis goes, "Do you honestly believe that's credible? So this is 2006. I'm a junior officer. Do you honestly think they would have remembered me from Adam? Of course not. They're just trying to get into the news because they know people like you will consume it because it fits your preordained narrative." Well, I got to tell you, if somebody was torturing me and a lawyer was standing there smiling as I was being tortured, I would remember their face. And I'm terrible with faces. I'm so face blind. One time I was walking down the street, my own kids were walking up to me and I didn't recognize them. I am terrible. I'm constantly asking Louise, who is that actor? Because I'm so face blind. I would have remembered if somebody was torturing me. But DeSantis was just hysterical. Oh my. Okay, well, it's 56. Well, it's the end of the show, isn't it? We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you so much for joining us today. And apologies for the phones falling apart there toward the end of the show. We'll be reaching out to our providers and try to fix this situation before tomorrow's program. Anyhow, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So many great organizations out there, from your local Democratic Party through Indivisible and others. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.